work here. I'm literally wearing my hospital ID.
Buddy, at this point, I don't care. You are coming with me.
It's because I'm black. That's why you don't even bother to check my badge.
I said, don't move. Who are you and what are you doing running in here? The voice, breathless and aggressive, crackled from a body-worn camera. The image it captured was shaky, focused on the back of a man in dark blue scrubs, his hands calmly placed against the sterile tile of a hospital wall. A controlled, even voice responded, not turning around. "Officer, you are interfering with a medical emergency. There is a patient in cardiac arrest 50 feet from here. I am the attending physician." The officer scoffed, the sound a sharp burst of static. "A doctor? Right, and I'm Santa Claus. Now stay put before I give you a real reason to need a doctor." This exchange, recorded at 11:42 p.m. on the night of October 14th, marks the beginning of the end of a 15-year career. The location was the third-floor emergency wing of City General Hospital. The officer was Frank Dixon, badge number 7312. The man he had just accosted was Dr. Julian Carter, the hospital's esteemed chief of emergency medicine, a man whose sole focus at that moment was responding to a life-or-death code blue alert. The official record of this incident, compiled by the Internal Affairs Division under Case File 78B4, is a study in swift and decisive karmic justice. It is a story built on irrefutable evidence, high-definition footage from multiple CCTV cameras, the damning audio and video from Officer Dixon's own body cam, and the sworn testimony of a half-dozen medical professionals. This is the documented account of how a single act of explicit racial bias, a baseless assumption made in a brightly lit hallway, did not just fail, it backfired with catastrophic and financially devastating precision, resulting in a summary dismissal, the forfeiture of a pension valued at nearly $1 million, and a civil lawsuit that would cost the offending officer everything he owned. The night had been, until that point, deceptively calm. A low, steady hum of ventilation systems and the rhythmic beeping of distant monitors formed the hospital's nocturnal pulse. Dr. Julian Carter was in his office, reviewing patient charts under the cool, focused glow of a desk lamp. At 38, he was one of the youngest chiefs of emergency medicine in the state, a position earned through a relentless work ethic and a preternatural calm under pressure. His record was flawless, his reputation sterling. He was known for his steady hands during complex trauma surgeries and his ability to make split-second decisions that pulled patients back from the brink. The quiet was shattered at 11:41 p.m. The sharp, piercing warble of a code blue alarm cut through the air, a sound that instantly activated every trained instinct in his body. The alert originated from ICU, Bed 3. Cardiac arrest. Without a moment's hesitation, Dr. Carter was on his feet and out the door. His mind was already a step ahead, cycling through the ACLS algorithms, calculating potential drug dosages, and visualizing the patient's chart. His movement through the corridor was not a frantic sprint, but a controlled, powerful stride, what residents called the Carter Trot, a pace honed by a decade of responding to such emergencies. Every second mattered. The data was clear. For every minute that passed without CPR and defibrillation, a patient's chance of survival dropped by 10%. He was the patient's best chance, and he was moving toward them. Simultaneously, on the same floor, Officer Frank Dixon was finishing up paperwork for a minor fender bender that had sent a driver to the ER for observation. For him, the hospital was a place of tedious procedure, a bureaucratic stop at the end of a long shift. He was tired, jaded, and operating on a worldview colored by a long history of suspicion. His service record, buried in a file at headquarters, told a story his superiors had consistently chosen to ignore. 12 citizen complaints for misconduct, most involving aggressive stops and racially charged language. None had stuck, always boiling down to his word against another's. But tonight was different. Tonight, his actions would be recorded. As the code blue alarm blared, a sound whose meaning he either did not comprehend or did not care to, He saw a black man in scrubs moving quickly down the hall. His mind, conditioned by prejudice, did not register the context, the hospital setting, the medical attire, the universal signal of a medical crisis. It saw only what it was programmed to see. The body cam audio would later capture his muttered words, a quiet declaration of his intent. Got a runner, looks suspicious. This single baseless assumption was the seed of his own professional ruin. He saw not a doctor on a mission to save a life, but a target for his authority. He adjusted his duty belt, the leather creaking in the quiet hallway, and stepped directly into Dr. Carter's path. He didn't ask a question. He issued a command, his voice a sharp bark meant to intimidate and control. The doctor's focused stride came to an abrupt halt, his mind momentarily jolted from the complex medical crisis ahead of him to the uniformed obstacle standing before him. The officer's hand was already moving toward his handcuffs, a gesture of absolute certainty in his flawed judgment, a mistake that would soon be calculated in dollars and cents down to the last penny. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor did nothing to mask the sour tang of prejudice radiating from Officer Frank Dixon. His grip on Dr. Carter's upper arm was tight, a proprietary act of dominance that was wholly unnecessary. The doctor remained still, not out of fear, but from a calculated assessment of the situation. His heart rate, which he could measure as calmly as if he were reading a patient's chart, was only slightly elevated, a physiological response to the adrenaline of the code blue, not the manhandling by the officer. The CCTV camera mounted on the ceiling corner, its small red light a silent witness, recorded the stark contrast between the two men. Dixon was agitated, his breathing shallow and audible on his own body cam. His face was a mask of self-righteous conviction, his eyes scanning Carter's simple blue scrubs as if they were an elaborate disguise. Carter, on the other hand, was a study in control. His shoulders were relaxed, his posture non-threatening, his focus still aimed down the hallway toward the ICU, where a human life was fading. "Officer," he began, his voice kept deliberately even, a tool he used to calm panicked family members in frantic residence. "My name is Dr. Julian Carter. My identification is clipped to my right pocket. You can see it clearly. I am the chief of emergency medicine here. There is a patient in cardiac arrest in the ICU. I need to be there." He spoke with the simple, declarative power of fact, offering Dixon a clear and immediate path to de-escalation. It was a path Dixon refused to see, let alone take. "A doctor?" Dixon repeated the word with a venomous sneer, the sound distorted by his body cam's microphone. "That's what they all say. You think putting on a costume gives you a free pass to run around wherever you want?" The officer's logic was a closed loop, a self-fulfilling prophecy of suspicion, where any evidence to the contrary was dismissed as part of the deception. He gave the ID clipped to Carter's pocket a cursory, contemptuous glance, but made no move to actually read it. To do so would be to risk being proven wrong, and in his worldview, he was never wrong. Dr. Carter tried again, shifting his approach from stating his identity to explaining the universal stakes of the emergency. "The alarm you hear is a code blue. It means a patient's heart has stopped. We have a window of approximately 4 to 6 minutes before a lack of oxygenated blood causes irreversible brain damage. You have already wasted nearly 60 seconds of that window. Please let me do my job." He was not pleading, he was educating. He was laying out the irrefutable life and death calculus of the moment, believing perhaps naively that the fundamental value of a human life was a common ground they could both stand on. Dixon's response was to shove him harder against the wall. The impact was sharp, rattling a nearby medical cart filled with sterile supplies. The officer's face was now inches from Carter's. The camera captured the flecks of spittle that flew from his lips as he spoke, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. "I've heard better stories from shoplifters at the mall. You're not going anywhere until I say you are. The refusal to listen was absolute. It was a willful deafness, a deliberate choice to prioritize a baseless prejudice over a verifiable emergency. Dixon unclipped his handcuffs from his belt, the metallic click echoing in the hallway, a sound that signaled the final closing of any door to a peaceful resolution. He was now operating entirely on the flawed programming of his own bias, a programming that was about to crash his entire career. The cold, serrated metal of the handcuffs brushed against Dr. Carter's wrist, a point of no return. In that single tactile moment, the doctor's strategy shifted. His training as a trauma surgeon had prepared him for moments like this, when a situation deteriorates rapidly and a new, more aggressive course of action is required. The time for calm explanation was over. The time for asserting absolute authority had arrived. The surveillance footage shows a subtle but profound shift in his demeanor. He drew himself up to his full height, his spine straightening against the wall. The look of patient urgency in his eyes hardened into something else entirely, a look of pure, undiluted command. It was the face of a man who held the power of life and death in his hands on a daily basis, and who would not suffer the interference of a fool. Officer Dixon, blinded by his own arrogance, was unprepared for the transformation. He was expecting submission, perhaps a desperate plea. He was not expecting the voice that came out of Dr. Carter next. This was the voice that cut through the chaos of an emergency room, a voice that made nurses and residents snap to attention without a moment's hesitation. "Listen to me very carefully," Carter said, each word a precisely delivered scalpel. "I am Dr. Julian Carter, Chief of Emergency Medicine of this hospital, and you are actively obstructing a medical procedure. The patient in ICU bed 3 is currently in a state of ventricular fibrillation. That means their heart is quivering, not pumping. It is a fatal arrhythmia unless corrected with immediate defibrillation. Every second you detain me, you are not just violating my rights, you are decreasing a human being's chance of survival by 10%. The sheer specificity of the language, the clinical, unassailable terminology, struck Dixon with the force of a physical blow. This was not a vague story, it was a diagnosis. Carter wasn't finished. His eyes, cold and focused, locked on to the officers. Should that patient die, and the telemetry data will show the exact moment their heart stopped and the exact moment you intercepted me, I will personally ensure that the official hospital incident report, the coroner's report, and the subsequent wrongful death lawsuit all list the primary contributing factor as interference by a law enforcement officer. Your name, Frank Dixon, and your badge number, 7312, will be on every single one of those documents. Now, for the last time, take your hands off me and let me go save my patient." The power dynamic in the hallway had been completely inverted. Dixon still held the handcuffs, but he was no longer in control. He was frozen, his mind struggling to process the barrage of information and the sheer unshakable authority with which it was delivered. The threat was not of a complaint to his sergeant. It was a threat of being legally and professionally implicated in a patient's death. For the first time that night, a crack appeared in his wall of certainty. A flicker of doubt, of pure visceral fear registered in his eyes. He had accosted a man he believed to be a criminal, only to find out he had cornered the most powerful doctor in the building, and that doctor had just made him an accomplice to a potential homicide. What would you have done in Dr. Carter's position, faced with an armed officer who refused to listen to reason while a life hung in the balance? Let us know your thoughts below, and be sure to subscribe for the conclusion to this case. But the wall of certainty in Officer Dixon's mind was built not of reason, but of pure, unadulterated prejudice, and it was far too thick for facts to penetrate. Dr. Carter's precise, authoritative takedown did not inspire a moment of self-reflection. It triggered a deeper, more volatile layer of arrogant fury. In Dixon's warped worldview, the doctor's articulate and powerful command was not the plea of a professional trying to save a life, but the insolent challenge of someone who thought he was above the law. The flicker of fear in his eyes was instantly extinguished by a hot flash of indignation. The body cam footage registers a sharp, contemptuous snort. Dixon took a half step back, not in retreat, but to create space for a grander gesture of control. He saw Carter's unshakable calm as a personal insult, a refusal to grant him the submission he felt he was owed. He decided in that moment to double down, to escalate beyond the point of no return. "You think you can threaten me?" he sneered, the words a low growl. "You think throwing around big words is gonna get you out of this? That's it. You're done." The entire scene was being captured with perfect clarity by the dome-shaped CCTV camera mounted directly overhead, its unblinking eye documenting the unfolding disaster in high definition. It recorded Dixon reaching for his shoulder-mounted radio, his thumb deliberately pressing the transmit button. The action was slow, performative, meant to intimidate. He was calling in the cavalry, turning a simple, misguided stop into a full-blown incident, creating an official record that would ultimately serve as his own indictment. His voice, broadcast across the city's police dispatch network, was a work of pure fiction. "Dispatch, this is 731. I have an uncooperative and hostile individual at City General, 3rd floor. Claims to be a doctor, is making threats, requesting immediate backup." The lie was audacious, a complete inversion of reality. He painted Dr. Carter, the man standing perfectly still and composed against the wall, as the aggressor. He omitted the code blue, the medical scrubs, the ID badge, and the life-or-death urgency. He created a narrative of his own victimhood to justify his prejudice. The dispatcher's response crackled back, a calm, procedural voice that was unknowingly setting the final piece of the trap. "Copy that, 731. Backup is en route." Dixon let go of the button, a smug, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. He had won. He had called the man's bluff, and now the full weight of the department was coming to back him up. He had just sealed his fate. The call was logged, time-stamped, and recorded, a permanent digital testament to the lie that would cost him everything. The static hiss from Dixon's radio faded into the oppressive silence of the hallway, broken only by the distant rhythmic wail of the code blue alarm. A smug, triumphant smirk played on the officer's lips. He had called the man's bluff. He had asserted his dominance, and now the full weight of the department was coming to back him up. He saw Dr. Carter not as a person, but as a problem now solved, a nail hammered down. He had won. He adjusted his stance, puffing his chest out slightly, a peacock of petty authority enjoying the final moments before his victory was witnessed. It was in this precise moment of Dixon's self-congratulation that Dr. Carter made his move. It was not a physical action, but a shift in presence so profound it seemed to lower the temperature in the corridor. The surveillance footage shows him drawing a slow, deliberate breath. The look of patient urgency in his eyes was replaced by the cold, focused intensity of a surgeon at the most critical point of an operation. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it cut through Dixon's triumphant haze with the chilling precision of a scalpel.
"Officer Dixon," he said, the words perfectly enunciated, devoid of any emotion save for absolute certainty. "Before your colleagues arrive to witness the complete implosion of your career, I am giving you one final opportunity to comprehend the reality of your situation. You see the ID card clipped to my right pocket. You glanced at it, but you did not read it. I suggest you do so now." The command was so calm it felt more dangerous than any shout. Dixon hesitated, his smirk faltering. It was a bluff. It had to be. Still, a worm of doubt began to squirm in his gut. He let his gaze drift down, a slow, grudging movement. The camera over his shoulder would later provide internal affairs with a perfect, high-definition view of the moment his world collapsed. The ID card was standard hospital issue, laminated plastic on a retractable clip. But the details were anything but standard. There was the photo, a professional headshot of the man standing before him. Then the name, printed in stark black capital letters, Julian Carter, M.D., F.A.C.S. And below that, the line of text that vaporized every last molecule of Dixon's self-assurance, Chief of Emergency Medicine. The title was accompanied by the official gold-embossed seal of the City General Hospital Board of Trustees. It was not just an ID. It was a symbol of ultimate authority within these walls. The blood drained from Dixon's face, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. The change was instantaneous. The triumphant posture melted away, his shoulders slumping. His hand, which had been resting confidently on his belt, now twitched uselessly at his side. "No," he stammered, the word a weak puff of air. "That's a fake. You can't be." But the denial was hollow, a pathetic shield against the catastrophic truth. He had not just stopped a doctor. He had assaulted, detained, and threatened the single most powerful physician in the entire hospital, the man who answered to no one but the board itself, all while that man was on his way to save a life. The full weight of his actions crashed down on him in a single sickening wave. Dr. Carter watched the realization dawn without a flicker of expression. "Your denial is irrelevant," he stated, his voice a flat, clinical assessment. "Every word you have said, including your fabricated call to dispatch, has been recorded. The hospital's legal department will be subpoenaing your body cam footage by morning. Your career did not end when your backup was called. It ended the moment you laid your hands on me." At that moment, the sound of rubber-soled shoes slapping urgently against the linoleum floor echoed from the far end of the corridor. It was the sound of approaching professionals, but they were not the ones Officer Dixon was expecting. The truth has been revealed, but validation is what makes justice complete. Hit that subscribe button and like this video to see the moment Officer Dixon's world is publicly dismantled by the very people he thought were on his side. The footsteps grew from a distant, slapping echo into an urgent, percussive drumming on the polished linoleum. It was the sound of controlled panic, of professionals moving at the absolute limit of speed while maintaining precise focus. Officer Dixon, his mind still trying to reject the impossible truth printed on the ID badge, turned to see a woman in green surgical scrubs and 2 ICU nurses bearing down on them, their faces etched with a combination of clinical intensity and raw desperation. The woman leading the charge was Dr. Evelyn Reed, the hospital's notoriously brilliant and famously abrasive chief of surgery, a person whose institutional authority was second only to Carter's. Her sharp, intelligent eyes took in the entire scene in a single microsecond. Her most trusted colleague, the chief of emergency medicine, pinned against a sterile wall while the code blue alarm continued its relentless screaming pulse. The confusion on her face instantly hardened into pure, unadulterated outrage. "Julian!" she gasped, her voice a ragged cry of disbelief that cut through the tense antiseptic air like a siren. "What in the hell is going on? We've lost his pulse. He's in VFib. We're on the 3rd round of epinephrine and we're getting no response. We need you for the paddles now, Julian." The words were a rapid-fire volley of clinical confirmation. Each one a nail being hammered into the coffin of Dixon's fabricated reality. VFib, epinephrine, paddles. This was not a vague story concocted by a suspect. It was a real-time medical catastrophe unfolding second by second, and he was standing directly in the path of the only person who could stop it. Dixon's world, which for 15 years had been built on a foundation of unshakable self-righteousness, began to liquefy. This woman, clearly a high-ranking surgeon, knew Carter. She was pleading with him, relying on him. Her palpable panic was a terrifying mirror reflecting the true magnitude of his own catastrophic blunder. Before he could even formulate a defensive word, another figure arrived, this one larger and moving with the heavy, deliberate gait of institutional power. It was Arthur Vance, the hospital's head of security, a stoic ex-detective with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He had been alerted by a frantic call from the ICU charge nurse, and his presence signaled that the situation had escalated beyond a simple misunderstanding. His cold, assessing eyes swept over Dixon, dismissing him as an irrelevant, dangerous nuisance before locking on to Dr. Carter. "Doc, you okay?" Vance's voice was a low, protective rumble. He then turned his full, undivided attention to Dixon, and the ambient temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Officer," he stated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation or argument, "you are on private property, and you are actively obstructing a Level 1 medical emergency. You will release Dr. Carter this instant, or my next call will be to your commanding officer to have you removed from these premises for criminal trespass." The body cam footage from Sergeant Ken Wallace, badge number 1108, captures what happens next from a new, damning perspective. His camera activates the moment he steps through the automatic doors of the emergency wing, his face set in the grim, weary lines of a man who has been a cop for 25 years and knows a career-ending disaster when he is walking directly into one. The dispatcher's notes on the call had been sparse but deeply alarming. "Officer needs backup, hostile individual claiming to be a doctor." But Wallace knew Dixon. He knew his record, the long, ugly string of citizen complaints that always seemed to evaporate for lack of hard evidence. He also knew City General Hospital. He knew that inside this building, the doctors were kings, and one man in particular, the young, brilliant chief of the ER, was treated like a god by the staff because he performed medical miracles on a daily basis. As Wallace rounded the corner, his internal, cynical prediction materialized into a scene of pure professional horror. He saw his subordinate, Dixon, looking pale and cornered, physically holding the most important physician in the entire building against a wall. He saw the chief of surgery and the head of security flanking them like furious, high-powered guardians. He heard the incessant wail of the code blue alarm, a sound that told him everything he needed to know about the life-or-death stakes. He recognized Dr. Carter immediately from a dozen prior interactions at crime scenes and trauma calls. There was no question to be asked, no investigation needed. There was only damage control. "Dixon," he barked, his voice a weapon that sliced through the tension and made everyone flinch. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? Let him go, now!" The command was not a request, it was a public execution of authority. Dixon's hands flew off Dr. Carter as if the doctor's scrubs had suddenly become white-hot. Sergeant Wallace didn't stop. He marched forward until he was inches from his subordinate, his gaze fixed on Dixon's face, a look of profound disappointment and cold fury in his eyes. He was creating a public spectacle of accountability, a clear message to the hospital staff that this behavior was not sanctioned. "Give me your weapon," he ordered, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Give me your badge. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately." The humiliation was absolute, a public stripping of every symbol of Dixon's identity and power, performed in front of the very people he had tried to dominate. Dixon fumbled with the clasp on his holster, his fingers suddenly clumsy and useless. As the heavy firearm was handed over, followed by the shiny metal badge that had been the source of his arrogance, Dr. Carter was already gone. He had given Dixon's complete and utter collapse not a single glance. The second he was free, he had turned to Dr. Reed, his mind already back in the fight, the incident behind him. "What's his last rhythm strip look like?" he asked, his voice calm and focused as they both broke into a dead run toward the ICU. "Let's get the ultrasound to the bedside. I want to check for tamponade." He was a professional. His mission was to save a life, and the petty drama of one man's ruin was already fading behind him, an irrelevant and forgotten echo. The wheels of institutional justice, once set in motion by Sergeant Wallace's decisive action, ground forward with a cold and merciless efficiency that left no room for appeal, denial, or negotiation. For Frank Dixon, the walk out of City General Hospital, stripped of his badge and weapon, was not merely the end of a bad shift. It was the end of his entire life as he knew it. The internal affairs investigation was a formality, a procedural autopsy on a career that was already dead on arrival. The evidence was not just compelling, it was absolute. There was no his word against mine. There was only the digital record of his own voice, his own actions, damning him in high-definition color from two separate and corroborating angles. The 48-hour disciplinary hearing was less an inquiry and more a sentencing. The board reviewed the file, Case File 78B4, in under an hour. They watched the CCTV footage, which showed Dixon's unprovoked aggression. They watched his own body cam footage, which captured his sneering contempt and fabricated call to dispatch. They read the sworn statements from Dr. Evelyn Reed, Arthur Vance, and Sergeant Wallace himself. The verdict was unanimous and summary. His dismissal letter, a 2-page document that would become a public record, cited gross misconduct, abuse of authority, violation of departmental codes on bias-based policing, and conduct that brought profound discredit upon the department. The first financial blow landed with the finality of a guillotine. A clause in the police union's collective bargaining agreement, a clause designed to deter the most egregious forms of misconduct, stipulated that any officer terminated for cause involving a criminal act or a gross violation of civil rights would forfeit their entire vested pension. 15 years of service, of contributions, of accrued interest, a future he had counted on, valued at a precise $850,000, was vaporized. It was as if the years he had served had never existed, erased by 2 minutes of unchecked prejudice in a hospital hallway. But that was only the beginning. The civil complaint, filed in federal court under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 for the deprivation of civil rights under color of law, was a masterclass in legal evisceration. Dr. Carter's attorneys laid out the case with such irrefutable clarity that the city's legal department knew a public trial would be a multi-million-dollar catastrophe. They settled in a matter of weeks. The final figure was $2,400,000. The city's insurance carrier covered the bulk of it, but the policy carried a $150,000 deductible for acts of willful misconduct, a cost the city's attorneys, eager to distance the department from Dixon's actions, successfully argued should be attached as a personal liability to the offending officer. A lien was placed against his home. His bank accounts were frozen. His 401k was seized. He was rendered financially insolvent, the architect of his own ruin. The professional consequences cascaded just as brutally. The state's Peace Officer Standards and Training Board convened and, based on the same overwhelming evidence, permanently revoked his law enforcement certification. He was now a professional non-entity, barred from ever wearing a badge, carrying a gun, or even working as a mall security guard in that state or any of the 37 others with reciprocity agreements. His name, Frank Dixon, became infamous within the law enforcement community. The body cam footage, stripped of identifying information, but not of its raw, cringeworthy power, became a staple in police academies across the nation. His legacy was now a 12-minute training video titled Implicit Bias and Escalation Failure, a mandatory viewing for cadets from California to Maine. He had achieved a form of immortality he never wanted, his face a permanent poster child for prejudice and incompetence. While Dixon's world was being dismantled piece by financial piece, Dr. Julian Carter's world remained unchanged, except for the better. He and Dr. Reed, using the advanced cardiac ultrasound he had called for, successfully identified the cause of the arrest, a rare pericardial tamponade, and performed an emergency pericardiocentesis, saving the patient's life. He continued to lead the City General ER with his trademark calm and brilliance. When the $1.5 million settlement check arrived, he quietly used a significant portion of it to endow the Dr. Eleanor Vance Scholarship for Underrepresented Minorities in Medicine at his alma mater, named after his mother. He transformed the ugliness of one man's prejudice into a legacy of opportunity for a new generation of healers. The final tally of Frank Dixon's 2 minutes of bigotry was a career destroyed, a pension of $850,000 lost, personal assets of $150,000 seized, and his name made a permanent synonym for failure. A total financial and professional cost well over $3 million. Did he ever comprehend the totality of his ruin? Did he understand that the authority he abused was a fragile trust, not an absolute right? And did he, in the silent, empty years that followed, finally learn the simple, quantifiable truth that prejudice always comes with a price, and that sometimes the bill is paid in full, down to the very last cent?